Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lindsay McGrath. I am the Communications and Events Specialist for the Office of Alumni and Donor Relations here at Smith. Thank you for joining us either live today or through our recording on our YouTube channel. Your participation helps to keep our Smith community strong, and we are so grateful, especially to Jess, Ileana, Chelsea, and Allie for sharing in conversation with us today. For our program today, we will start with some introductions, followed by a conversation with Jess and our panelists, and then we will open it up to Q&A from the audience. We are recording the webinar today, and it will soon be made available on the Smith College YouTube channel. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague, Christy Capone Kennedy, class of 2010, and the Director of Alumni and Professional Networks and Career Programs here at Smith. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you, Lindsay, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Rejection That Changed My Life, a panel of Smith alums on being let down, turning it around, and burning it up at work. I'm here today to give you all a brief introduction to the Smith Business Network, a co-sponsor of today's webinar, and to introduce our featured speaker, Jess Bacall. First, the Smith College Business Network. It's a powerful and fairly straightforward concept. The network is all of you. It's you, it's your fellow 53,000 Smith alums, and the entire Smith community activated around a central goal of furthering professional aspirations in community with one another. Any Smithy who goes to work or who would like to work is encouraged to participate in the Smith Business Network. The network belongs to you. It is our goal to introduce you to the resources and tools that exist within this network and show you how to leverage this network to realize your professional goals through events and programming like today's webinar. Everything you need is here within your Smith network. We want you to put the Smith network to work for you. There's more to come there, so please keep an eye out for future Smith Business Network programming and join us. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our featured speaker today, Jessica Bacall. Jess leads programs to help students explore identity and find resilience in community. She also teaches a course called Designing Your Path, which guides students to consider questions like, what is your story? Where have you been and where are you going? What matters to you? And what skills do you need to pursue what matters? Jess is a twice published author, and the alums we'll hear from today are featured in her books. We'll go ahead and drop the links to her books in the chat for you all so you can take a look. Her most recent work, The Rejection That Changed My Life, is the inspiration for today's webinar. So Jess, now I want to turn it over to you so you can introduce our panelists and get us started. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Christy and Lindsay and Ashley and Susan for organizing this and taking care of every single detail. And I love that I'm seeing some of my like current students on have said that they're here in the chat, but also like past people like Angela Acosta, and I'm sure other people. So it's super fun to have all of you alumni here. So I'm going to give, so I'll talk about my book for just a couple of minutes, and then I will introduce these amazing women who have agreed to spend an hour with us. I'm so grateful. The book, where is it? The Rejection That Changed My Life, grew out of, well, basically I went into a internal job search here at Smith. So I'd been here for 15 years, but applied for a bigger job. And if you've ever been through an internal job search, you know that it's really stressful. And there was actually like a day when I was in the process where I like parked my car and went to work. And when I went back at the end of the day, I left my motor running all day. So I was very stressed out. And then in the end, even though, I felt like I'd done a lot of great work at Smith, I didn't get this job, this promotion. And I thought like I was disappointed, but I was also like a little relieved, and I noticed that relief. I was a little bit relieved that I didn't have to do this other job, and it made me think like, this is kind of interesting. Maybe it would be interesting to hear other people's stories. Maybe the experience of being rejected is more complex than we realize. And I wonder if other people have had this experience of like trying so hard and being like really striving to get some big promotion or some big job, and to have the rejection kind of like introduce them to thoughts and feelings they didn't know existed. So I realized I didn't even know that I didn't want that job. The other thing that was interesting is it led me to a new position at the college and to start teaching this class. And that's part of, being recognized at the college. I was lucky enough in my situation that even though I didn't get that job, there were people who recognized what I did, and I was able to kind of continue along my career path. But I thought, like, wouldn't it be interesting to develop a book and gather rejection stories from other people? And I turned to, I did a lot of research to find diverse contributors, people I could interview from diverse careers, diverse cultural backgrounds. But some of my favorite interviewees are right here with us today. So I'll introduce them, and then I have a question for each of them, and they're gonna speak a little bit about a rejection story, and then we'll have time for your questions and kind of additional conversation among all of us. So Chelsea Klein was an Ada Comstock scholar who graduated in 2007. Chelsea's a social justice and reproductive rights activist, organizer, educator. She's a diversity and inclusion focused writer. She's the mother of 3. She is the co-founder and executive director of a new nonprofit called Galvanized, which is also a podcast, and provides customized and mission-driven support for strategic planning and political campaigns. And I went to Chelsea because I knew that she had run this very successful political campaign in Massachusetts. Anyway, she'll tell you more about that story. Ileana Jimenez, who graduated in '97, is a teacher at Elizabeth Irwin. You are still teaching Elizabeth Irwin, right, Ileana? Yeah. She's also now pursuing a doctorate at Columbia. Ileana actually talked about, she had a great story in my first book, which was all about work mistakes. And it's one that I think about all the time. It was about her early teaching career, where she was working at a school that really wasn't a match for a super difficult supervisor. Anyway, she told that story. She's going to talk about a different story today. But Ileana has been a teacher and activist for nearly 25 years. She's the founder of feministteacher.com and the hashtag HSFeminism and hashtag K12 feminism hashtags. Her doctoral research at Teachers College includes women of color feminisms in schools, intersectional pedagogies, feminist digital and school-based activisms, and feminist research methodologies. She was a Fulbright recipient. It's often, like not often, sometimes I will meet a college student, a Smith first year from New York City, and we'll have this incredible moment where I'll find out that they went to Elizabeth Irwin. They were sent to Smith by Ileana. It's so cool. And there's actually a student who I recently met. It was very exciting, a student who's in Posse. I don't know if she's here today, but she's one of your, she just loves you. Allie Einbinder is graduated in 2010. And Allie is a musician and bassist for Potty Mouth, which was a band born out of Smith College. So Allie double majored in sociology and study of women and gender. And when she graduated, she came to work with me, first as a temp and then as a full-time assistant in what was then the Center for Work and Life at Smith. So Allie and I had a lot of adventures and fun times together. Meanwhile, she had never played music before herself. She'd been a big fan, especially of punk, and she taught herself to play bass. And then like before my very eyes, she started a band and then was signed by Atlantic Records. And I had to say goodbye to her because she moved to LA to have this band. And so she's going to talk about that. That band had over the last decade a lot of success. They had 2 full-length albums, 3 EPs. They had singles and music videos, and they toured around the US dozens of times. They performed at Lollapalooza in 2016. They toured with the Go-Go's, Churches, Against Me, Pup. They actually have their last LP, and Ali will talk about that, is coming out later this month. It's called 1% Happier. Potty Mouth is a great band. And Ali is like in this transition phase now where she's kind of moving to her next thing. And anyway, I'm excited to hear you talk about that, Ali. But we're going to start with Chelsea. So Chelsea, when I interviewed you, which I'm remembering now, it was like pre-COVID, and you had a cold and you drank tea in my house. You talked about running for state senate and losing a hard-fought campaign. You had built a lot of support in Massachusetts. And you said this amazing thing. You said it felt like a little like when you're a kid, you're scared there's a monster in the closet, and you get up the gumption to open the door and you realize there's no monster. Like that's what that losing that campaign and that kind of, we were framing it as a rejection, felt like to you. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little about why you ran and about how losing the campaign strengthened you. One of the themes in the book is that rejections, I think, do strengthen us. I'm sure people on this call have experience with that. It almost is like you build muscles for managing rejection. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear about that, Chelsea, and also about how it set you on the path that you're on now.
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you, Jess, for inviting me and for writing this wonderful book. It's been really exciting to see how this book has landed for so many people, and like, I think validated people or comforted people. And I just think it's so important to be talking about this. Just like you said in your book, like oftentimes our rejections are not on our resumes. And so they're sort of hidden and can lead to a lot of shame and anguish for people. So I think the more that we share these stories and the more that we talk about it, the better, because we don't need to be feeling ashamed, and we don't need to be like having so much pain around what's a normal part of being ambitious and reaching for our dreams, right? So I think the more that we normalize it, the better. So a little bit about my background, that I had been a low-income single teen mom. And by the time I got to Smith, my daughter was, I think, 6, around in there. And I didn't actually talk about my background all that much because I felt ashamed of it. It's not cool to be low income. It's not cool to be on food stamps. It's not cool to have a child on your own when you're 19, right? So I kept a lot of that, as much as I could. Obviously, I had a kid, but I didn't really talk so much about my background. And I went on to Harvard Divinity School, and I went on to work in higher education. And I was coaching non-traditional students, people who had been very much like myself, and did a lot of confidence building and leadership development and career development with people. And I had also gotten involved with helping people to run for office through the Women's Fund of Western Massachusetts, which is, they have a program, I don't think it's actually still in existence, but it's the Leadership Institute for Political and Public Impact. So I was involved in that program and was helping other people run for office. And it's funny because I had done so much encouraging of other people to run for office and hadn't fully thought of myself as doing it, which I know sounds ridiculous. And I only kind of realized that in hindsight. But as things sort of shift around in the political landscape, as they do, I did notice an opening with our state senator at the time. This was now a few years ago. And a pretty complicated, scandal and ethics considerations and things like that. And just sort of, reading the wind, as you do if you're someone who pays attention to politics, I felt like there was an opening. And I suddenly had this sort of lightning bolt of like, I didn't really see anyone who was like me, who was in there's not many people like me who were in elected, positions or positions of leadership in public service. And it suddenly occurred to me that I could use my story to help others and to, sort of decrease shame of being low income, of having a child, of being single, blah, 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 right? Like I could normalize some of these things by running for office and by hopefully serving as an elected official. Which again, I know it sounds sort of ridiculous, but I think when you're at least for me, in my own little world, it's like I didn't think outside of my own, wanting to sort of protect myself or not be open about my background. And I thought, oh, I should run. And of course, it took a lot of encouragement. I think the statistics are it takes an average of, a woman being asked or a femme-identified person being asked, 7 or more times to actually run for office before they actually do. And I had been encouraged. Of course, I was in those circles. And so it was sort of like, oh, I guess I could do this, even though it scared the absolute heck out of me. And an important part of my story was that I was incredibly shy, like painfully shy. And I was the kind of kid where if we went around the room and introduced ourselves, I would sit and practice my own name and where I was from because I was so shy. I would sit there like, my name is Chelsea. And then when it got to be my turn, I was really trembly. So the idea of running for office was like just light years beyond my comfort zone. And I think what really launched me into feeling that, sorry, I was reading the chat. I thought it was aimed at me. I think what really launched me into going for it was that I could help other people and I could normalize, parts of my story for other people. And that being an elected official was so exciting because I would basically be able to be an organizer and an activist, but with a platform and with money and with actual, the ability to actually make positive change as a real, pretty stalwart progressive Democrat. I was like, yes, let's do amazing change and let's go for it. So all of that felt really exciting. With the main undercurrent was that in my bones, I believe survivors. And that was a big part of what was going on in the political landscape in Massachusetts with this particular race was that I'm like, I believe survivors. And that's a big part of why I ran. And that was a big part of my announcement of running, knowing full well that I was poking a big bear with a big stick and knowing full well that I was talking about things that were going to make people uncomfortable. So it was my run was about standing, very squarely within my values and putting my money where my mouth is, right? Or walking the walk and talking the talk. And also not really knowing what the heck I was getting into. I don't think you really know until you're doing it with a lot of things, right? Like having a baby, like you're like, oh, this will be great. Oh my gosh, it really hurts, right? So that's what I said after I ran. I'm like, that was so much like having a baby. I'm like, I'll do my best. It'll be great. I'm like, wow, that really hurt. And I would do it again. And I encourage other people to do it. But now when I encourage other people to do it, it has a lot more oomph and a lot more gravitas because I did it. And I think that fear of failure holds so many of us back. And I think that's the real, I hate to say the expression silver lining, but that's the real oomph with my having run and having lost is now I can help others and say, yes, the worst case scenario happened. I didn't win, right? And it sucked and it's still worth it. And it was still important because important conversations were generated. I learned so much. I supported a whole team of interns and staff and volunteers. And it was really powerful and really amazing and really great. And I'm really glad that I did it. And I love helping other people. And I love being able to use my story to help other people run for office. The thing about, rejections, we talk about being not on your resume, except mine was incredibly public, which again is why I say like worst case scenario, because, when you run for office, it's out there and down to, every single person that vote, obviously not their identities, but how many people voted for you and how many people voted for the other person. So it's pretty intense, but I feel like it was a little bit like trial by fire, as someone who had a hard time even introducing myself. I was like, I may as well go big or go home and really go for it. And it really did strengthen me because I didn't combust on site when I didn't win, when I failed so publicly. I shouldn't say fail because it really wasn't a failure. That's the way elections are, right? And a lot of people don't win on their first time. And also it takes tremendous privilege to be able to run for office. And that has forced me to, I remind myself continuously that like, not everyone can run. And when we say you should run for office, that's kind of a blithe thing to say. Like, we have to be a lot more careful how we encourage people and the language we use, because it's a tremendous privilege to run for office. And I did it by the skin of my teeth. And I even had a partner and a full-time job, and like begged every single person I knew for $5 to help me, keep the lights on in my campaign headquarters. So I really do believe that rejection is a muscle, and the more that we do it and the more that we can put ourselves out there and try scary things, then the easier it gets. And it's still scary, and I still feel nervous when I introduce myself, and I still do it. So I think I'm running out of time. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
But, Chelsea, thank you. It's really an incredible story. And it's so every time I hear you tell it, it's like, it's still inspiring. And you're amazing. And I hope you will talk a little bit more, like as after everyone's talked about kind of the nonprofit that you've now developed and what you're doing to help other women, and your coaching, and yeah. So thank you.
I'd be happy to whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Allie, so another piece of the book. So I did these interviews, and then I thought about what were some emergent themes. And one of the themes that I really heard was that rejection can spark creativity. And I actually found some pretty recent research by this guy named Jack Goncalo, Goncalo, who studies this and has found actually, that rejection can spark creativity, especially, this is interesting, in people who think of themselves as like a little different, which I think describes everyone who's ever gone to Smith. So we're all the people who, I didn't go to Smith, but I consider myself an honorary Smithy. The people for whom rejection sparks creativity. Allie, when I interviewed you, you talked about having had these fancy managers in LA when you first moved there. And then when they dropped the band kind of suddenly, in the middle of making a record. And you talked about how you had to get really creative in terms of like how to move forward. So I wonder, you could speak to that, but then I think, you're also, actually got to just have dinner with Allie. So, Allie's, the band is now in the process of dissolving, which is definitely, it's a loss, but it's also this incredible opportunity to move on with the next piece of your life. Allie happens to be very, very smart and talented. So, I'm wondering, like, if your experience, if the experience with the management company dropping the band has like offered you anything in terms of like the turning point you're at now, like did that past rejection help? Does it inform like the steps that you're taking now and like the strength that you built then? That's not too convoluted. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The feeling that I initially had when my bandmates and I decided to end the band after 10 years of being together was a lot of the same feelings that I was having when in 2018 we were dropped by our management company, which I'll get back to where I'm at right now, but just for context, I'll talk a little bit more about my story and how my band started. As Jess read in my bio, I didn't start playing bass until I had already graduated from Smith. It was like I graduated, I worked really, really hard at Smith. I'm sure we all did, Smith is that kind of school. And when I graduated, I had free time. And so I've always been a huge music fan. I've always been involved in some sort of local music scene. And so I started teaching myself how to play bass. And from there, I got together with two other Smith alumni, Phoebe Harris and Victoria Mandanis. And Phoebe had never played guitar before. She had a mutual friend who lived in the area who was still in high school named Abby. Abby had never played guitar before. And so we literally The only one of us who had any experience in their instrument was our drummer, Victoria, which was great because having a good drummer helps when no one else knows what they're doing. But we very much started in this very DIY spirit. We had no big goals or expectations. We just wanted to have fun and sort of create this safe and comfortable and affirming environment to learn how to play music and get better at our instruments and take creative risks and all of that. And so we did that. That was the intention that Potty Mouth started with, and we continued to keep working. And as we achieved one goal, you know, releasing our first EP, then we'd have another goal, and you know, the bar would always get higher, and it was fun. But you know, none of us ever expected to for the band to transition into a serious career until we kept going. A few years went by, we were touring more, and things just got more serious. We suddenly had a booking agent, we had a lawyer, we had management companies reaching out to us all the time, wanting to work with us. And again, starting not only, you know, starting from this very DIY spirit, like not only did we not really have any formal training as musicians, none of us had formal training in how to navigate the music industry. I mean, I don't think many artists do. It's one of those things that you sort of just find yourself in suddenly, unless you know, grew up with it. Or I mean, a lot of people in LA, their parents are involved or whatever, but none of us had anything like that. So we were really learning as we were doing. And like Jess said in my bio, by 2015 we got an offer from Atlantic Records, and it was one of those things where it was like, how could we possibly say no to this? This is so much money. I mean, for us, it was so much money. But you know, it was more money than we had ever gotten for music. It was a multi-album deal, but was really starting out as a development period. They flew us out to Seattle to record, and at that point things were serious enough where I left my job at Smith, moved to LA with my band, and from there, I mean, so many things happened. We had a lot of experiences to this day I'm just like, I can't believe that that was my life. I really still can't believe it. That, you know, we started working with this management company, and this is what I talk about in Jess's book, is we started working with this management company that was started by these two semi-famous celebrity type musicians that were in a band and decided to start their own management company. And when we moved to LA, it was like they were our family. Like that was what made me feel comfortable about moving to LA, moving across the country away from my family and friends, was we had this management company. They were looking at apartments for us. They were really taking care of us. And part of working with them was we got to record in their studio, which was huge because we got to work with their in-house producer and have access to all these resources. And at this point, we actually ended our contract with Atlantic because it just, for various reasons, didn't work out. But our new management company was like, don't worry about it. That contract was never good for you anyway. We're going to get you something better. And it was just, suddenly we just had this team of people that were so involved in our lives and were full, blowing all this hot air, honestly, up our asses, and just promising the world to us and taking care of us. And it felt great. And as their company grew and as they started to take on more artists, their ability to, support us changed. And eventually by 2018, we had been spent the last couple of years working on this album in their studio. It was sort of like whenever we could get in, we were working on it. But they had other artists that they were working with that had more money, and so those artists became prioritized, and we got pushed further and further to the sideline. So by 2018, when like none of these promises that they had told us were being fulfilled or whatever, we were about 80% done with our album, but we had some stuff left to finish. We had a whole song left to finish, and in their studio, and yeah, there's just so much involved in this story. I'm trying to make it as short as possible, but basically by 2018, they called us on the phone, or they had their brother call us on the phone actually, and they were like, at this time we can no longer represent Potty Mouth. And it was like out of left field. I mean, it was like going from, you know, we started out as this DIY band, we knew how to do everything ourselves, and then we moved to LA and had this management company, and they're doing everything for us, and then suddenly they're like, we can't do anything for you anymore. And so that being the rejection did spark a lot of necessary creativity, because we had an album to finish. So we were like, how are we going to finish this album? Okay, I have 2 minutes left. How are we going to finish this album without having any support? We also, our booking agent dropped us. Things just suddenly fell apart, and that's just what happens in music sometimes. But we had to get super creative. We finished it on our own. We partnered with a DIY label that actually has values in line with ours, and it ended up creating so many more connections for us in the end. And so much more I could say. I would just read my chapter in Jess's book if you want more details. But anyway, now I'm at a point where after 10 years, the band is ending. The pandemic really took a toll on us, like it did for a lot of artists, especially artists in the music industry. When you can't tour, it becomes really hard to do anything. But I'm one of the reasons I'm so grateful that my story is documented in Jess's book is because when I first read it myself, after like, I think we did the interview in 2018 and I read it, or 2019, and I read it just this past year when it came out. It was so healing to read because it offered me so much perspective of, yeah, I survived that. Like, not only did we survive it, but we came out feeling like we were more in line with who we are and our values. And it reminded us of all that we can do on our own, and how sometimes when you hand off control to these other people, it's like you just lose control of something that is your art. And now I'm really feeling that again now, because having all the insight I have now about working with certain types of people, moving forward, I just feel like I have more clarity about the kinds of people that I want to work with, the kinds of people that I'd ever want to have on my team. And also it's allowed me to shed a lot of old narratives about myself that were not serving me, and shedding narratives about what is possible. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Allie. That was so amazing. So you did such a good job compressing. It is like, there is so much in that story. There's so much I even cut out from like what we talked about when I put it in the book. I will just say that Allie is like a little sister to me, and now she's available so if you have some really cool job you want to email her about, she's so smart and actually worked for me for many years and is incredible. Sorry, Allie, I had to put it out there.
No, thank you. Yes, I am definitely in a networking period in my life right now.
Yeah.
Especially if you live in LA.
Yeah, and Allie's the person you want like on your team.
Thanks.
So, Ileana, well, you told an incredible story in my first book, but when I contacted you about this panel, you said right away, you emailed back, oh, I have a great rejection story about applying for doctoral programs in 2012 after your Fulbright, and you didn't get the funding you wanted, so you passed at that time on getting a PhD, and instead you went to India. You actually are getting a doctorate now, but I thought that your story really spoke to another of the themes in the new book, that it really is about how rejection can set you on a new path. And that's a theme that, applies to everyone on this panel. But I was wondering if you would talk about that experience and what happened afterward.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciated hearing Chelsea and Allie's stories. And I so appreciate also just the community in the chat. It's amazing that the last year of pandemic has created such community in spaces we never knew over a year and a half ago. It's like, where's the chat? Let's save the chat. So thank you, Jessica, for inviting us to talk about something so important. It is invisibilized. And I think at a place like Smith, rejection is kind of taboo. Like, oh, you got rejected, or that, that's not actually in the terminology of the Smith profile, right? Like we don't get rejected. We're the type who kind of persist and we get what we want, but that narrative actually doesn't serve us. I really appreciate what Ali said earlier about shedding narratives that don't serve us. And I think as much as I love the narrative at Smith that we can do it all, it's actually the rejection that leads us to the things that are actually the worthwhile persistence that remains. So my story, I think another part of this that I really want to highlight is age, which is that when I got rejected from the graduate schools that I applied to, I was 37. I think I applied when I was 36. So I think that part is important. So I wasn't applying like straight out of Smith, 22, or even kind of late 20s. So I want to situate my story kind of at a later point. I had applied for a Fulbright kind of in my mid 30s, when I was about the kind of 10-year mark of my teaching. And I had reached this point in my teaching when I thought, I'm ready for a new challenge. I'm ready for a new part of my career, or not career, but kind of a part of the journey, not so much the career, the journey of being in education that would allow me to deepen my commitment to young people in a different way. And so I applied for this Fulbright. It was super brand new. At that time, it was only in the second year. It's called the Distinguished Fulbright Award in Teaching, for anybody who wants to know. And this particular grant provides teachers with experience to go to another country and conduct research. It's not a teaching fellowship, it's a research fellowship for teachers. And that's the part that really pulled me in. And when I was there, I was able to interview queer youth in schools. And I thought, this is it. The next part of my life is going to be doctoral work. I want to do research. This is confirming for me an instinct that I want to conduct research with young people, with and alongside young people, on identity, on queerness, on schools, on feminism, on gender. I mean, I wanted to bring it all together. And so I applied to Harvard, Berkeley, Stanford, NYU, and Teachers College. I got rejected from all of those schools except for TC. And I remember showing up at Berkeley in particular, because I was like kind of visiting the schools, and I had not received the rejections yet. And I remember showing up at Berkeley in the winter of 2012, because I had gotten back from my Fulbright in 2011 and applied right away when I got back. And in 2012, in that winter, I landed at Berkeley, was walking around with a friend. And I remember at the Berkeley School of Education, they were setting up for welcoming their admitted graduate students. And I thought, they're setting up for an admitted graduate students event, but I haven't received either an acceptance or a rejection. So I went up to the table and I said, what is this event exactly? And they said, oh, this is our admitted doctoral students, event. And I thought, oh, I guess this is my rejection letter, like said in person, because I never received any kind of notice. So I remember getting fully red in the face, walking away, and I had so much shame. And that was the first time, that was the first kind of rejection. So Berkeley, and then Harvard, and then Stanford, and then NYU. It just, they kind of came in a slew. And then Teachers College accepted me with really at that time a pittance. It was like $10,000. And I said, I'm getting a signal, a message from the universe that right now is not the right time to do PhD work. I was 37 at that point, and I thought, what can I do next that is going to deepen this call that I have to build a movement, right? Build with others, the movement around feminism in schools, intersectional feminism in schools in particular, supporting queer youth as well, supporting girls, supporting young people in general. And I thought of my Fulbright network, and I said, you know what, I'm going to reach out to my Fulbright network. And I wrote to them, and in particular in India. And I said, you know, we all got along during our orientation back in August 2010, before we all went off to our various countries. And the administrators and teachers I had met from India coming to the US, we all really resonated with each other on the work we had done. So I reached out to them, and they said, why don't you come to India? And so I then asked my my school administration. I said, I'm going to take some time off. I'm not going to get a PhD. I'm going to take kind of like a leave of absence. And I took a leave for about 3 months between January to March of 2014. And I also want to add this other part, which is that I'm 37. I'm newly single. My partner of 7 or 8 years she and I had just broken up in 2013. So this is kind of like my eat, pray, love, but not quite. Like I go to India in January 2014, and I basically make it kind of like a tour of various schools in Delhi, Calcutta, Mumbai, Lucknow, and in each of these cities, I know another Fulbright alum who is either a teacher, an administrator, or an activist, or to connect me to an activist. And I also know Smith alums. And Mona Sinha, I just want to shout her out, connected me to a number of people in Delhi, in Calcutta. And that also broadened my experience in each of these cities. The other thing that happened was that Gloria Steinem happened to be on a book tour during that time for a book that was only released in India. And at every single stop of her tour, I happened to be in that city. So I was in Delhi when she launched the tour, and she was sitting with other kind of veteran Indian feminist activists. And then she was in Calcutta for another event that I went to that was like held at a really kind of private, amazing home. And then she was in Jaipur for the annual kind of amazing international book festival that they have in Jaipur, and she was on a panel there as well. And so I wound up seeing her kind of accidentally in each of these cities, and I wound up being able to talk to her face to face. And I have to say, Gloria Steinem is the most real in India. And I have a theory that it's because that's where she kind of faced her own space of coming to her own consciousness around not only feminist consciousness, but I would say kind of an early understanding of caste and race and activism. So it was really interesting to see her and meet her in India without the mask of like New York City feminist, Smith alum, like all the things. And I think that allowed me to also heal. Because I was in a lot of pain still from like all this rejection, big breakup with my partner. So then that, I don't know how much time I left because I'm looking at the chat. But all of that is to say that while I was in India, I was able to do things that I never would have been able to do if I had gone off to do a PhD. I was literally on the ground going from school to school, activist space to activist space, meeting young people, meeting teachers, meeting administrators, committing themselves to the work of feminism in schools globally in these settings. And then what I did was I had originally was going to be in India for 3 months, but I cut that into 6 weeks. And then I did the second 6 weeks in London. And when I landed in London, because I had the leave already, I was invited to speak at graduate schools of education, ironically, places like the Institute of Education, University of Sussex, and the University of Surrey. And in these spaces, I was able to meet feminist scholars who were super encouraging of my work. And they would ask me to come speak to their students, their graduate students, and they would say, Ileana, you need to apply for a PhD. And I said, I just did, and I was rejected. And so to get that confirmation from global scholars who were inviting me to speak and saying, no, you need to do this again. You need to do it again. You need to apply again. You're going to, this happens. And they would tell me this happens all the time. People get rejected in the first round. So the final thing I'm going to say is that I did wind up applying again. I did not apply to Harvard again, or Berkeley, or Stanford, or NYU. I applied to TC, I applied to CU Boulder, and I applied to Penn GSE. I got a full ride to CU Boulder for 5 years, and I got a 3-year fellowship to TC, and I was the only person in my cohort to receive the 3-year fellowship. I accepted the 3-year fellowship over the 5-year fellowship because I really wanted to be in New York, and I really wanted to stay in that and build that network there. And I also wanted to work with the people at Teachers College, as much as the people at CU Boulder were fantastic. There were people at TC who I felt would be able to support the kind of intersectional feminist work that I do with young people in schools, and that has turned out to be true. And the icing here is that I just accepted an adjunct position teaching a course on gender, sexuality, and schooling at Barnard for the spring. So it's one course. It's not like it's a 10-year track position. It's like it's one course, but I feel like it's like part of the icing of this whole thing is that we get rejected, we feel incredible shame, and then it's like, God damn it, there it is. People can see us. People will see us, and they do see us. So keep fighting.
That's amazing, Ileana. Thank you so much. And congratulations on everything amazing that's come out since that rejection that you described so vividly. Is painful to hear. And then it's just so amazing to hear about everything you're doing, and that you've been recognized, and really kind of right away, that the recognition that started coming to you, in part through reaching out to the Smith Network, but to other people, but your Fulbright cohort and others. So thank you for sharing that. We want to make sure to give people in the who are here a time to ask questions. So I have questions prepared for each of you, but I'm wondering if Lindsay or Christy want to tell me. Let's see. Oh, here's a question. Okay. So Kay Williams is asking, does anyone have any experience getting rejected for promotions or special positions within an organization, especially repeatedly? And I will say, and I'll you guys can think about it, but I'm going to put in the chat. Oh, I'm trying to make it go to everyone. Someone who I think does very interesting research on women with this is Raina Brands. I think she's at INSEAD. She's in England, but she's an organizational psychologist, and she does a lot of interesting research on what happens when women are rejected repeatedly within organizations. Anyway, I'm interested if any of you have thoughts.
I actually have experience with that, but it's reminding me of a conversation that I had with a guest on my podcast the other day. The woman, her name is Alexandra Chandler, and she's an openly trans woman who ran for Congress a couple of years ago. And I have a podcast called Galvanized, where we interview progressive leaders and change makers, and with the goal of sharing wisdom and sharing knowledge. And so we were talking about not getting what you want, or rejection or failure, and because she did not win her bid for Congress. So we were talking about how we recover after that kind of loss. And she was talking about having blue sky, as she put it, blue sky, big picture goals. And keeping those big picture goals in mind, even as you encounter smaller setbacks or sort of hurdles in the way, and how when you have your big picture goals in mind, then whatever kind of like, setbacks come at you, you can just sort of slightly shift direction and keep working towards those goals, even if it's not exactly what you wanted or not exactly the timing, but just always kind of keeping your goals in mind so that so when you do hit those setbacks, it's not as devastating because you can still kind of stand back and think about what you want at the end of the day, right? So I felt like that was really helpful, and I share that with you now. Hopefully that's helpful too, that yes, I have had those internal rejections when in process for promotion. I even had a situation where they had asked me to write up my own new job description and the job description of the person who would be my direct report. And then at the last minute, they said, oops, actually, it's not going to work out, with no explanation. I don't know if it was funding or if I said the wrong thing, or I don't know what. They didn't like my blouse that day. I have no idea. So that was really painful, just the not knowing, but just sort of being at peace with the not knowing, and also like sort of standing back like, okay, this is one thing that didn't happen, but I'm going to keep going because I have bigger fish to fry in this world and more work to do. So c'est la vie, I think, is really how I just ended up dealing with it.
Any other questions? Let's see.
And there are a couple that have come in and kind of in talking in kind of that rejection is constant. Joanne asks, I'm a poet, so rejection is constant. Acceptance rates and most publishers is less than 1%. Any ideas how to keep that energy up in the face of rejection?
For me, a friend of mine said this to me recently when I was feeling kind of beaten down by multiple rejections or losses that I was going through. And they said to me that they believe that sometimes these things happen, they feel like they happen repeatedly because the universe trusts in your resilience, and so sort of framing it that way as, okay, the universe trusts in my resilience. I don't mean for that to sound like overly I don't know, spiritual or whatever, but like there's really truth to that, where it's like if you're a poet or if you're in the arts, like it is just a reality that rejection is part of that world, unfortunately. And I think for artists, it can feel particularly difficult because, it's just like assigning some sort of like, external, like subjective value to the thing that you're pouring your heart and soul into. And so, but if you weren't resilient, you wouldn't keep doing it. I mean, I know for me personally right now, like things feel really hard, but I know for sure this is not the end for me in music. It's not the end for me in the arts. Like this is part of my life because this is what feeds me. And it's not the easiest path. If I wanted to choose the easiest path, I would be doing something completely different right now. I'd be working in an office, doing some administrative role because I know I'm good at it. But not to say that those, I love different types of work, but I know right now that I want to stay in the arts, and I know that requires resiliency, and that resiliency will just become stronger as I continue to go.
Yeah. I think that's so important, that like it feels like this thing that you have to do it, so you're going to keep doing it, like because I think you said, because it feeds you. Another some advice that contributors to the book gave. There was one woman who's a comedian, and she had a project to get 100 rejections, to aim for rejections, and I actually heard that from more than one person. The philosopher Kate Mann talked about doing that with her, sending out articles. Yeah, and there's an interview with Roz Chast who talks about that she submits cartoons to the New Yorker every week, and most of them are rejected. But getting together with some friends and saying, we're going to try to get 10 rejections before we meet again next month, or I'm going to put a sticker chart on my wall, and I'm going to put a sticker for every rejection, and when I have 50, I'm going to get myself a present. That can be a good way to like flip it a little bit for yourself. I saw another question up here.
Yeah, I have a question that came in from Victoria. I don't know if that's the one you're referencing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great conversation in the chat. So thank you all for your engagement there. It's wonderful to see. But Victoria asked, thank you so much for speaking today. I was wondering if anyone could talk about with age and the pressure to achieve so much at a young age. Often I feel that sometimes it is already too late to achieve things. I was wondering if anyone could touch upon this pressure to achieve everything by a certain age. I don't know if this question is, of course, yes. And I want to be mindful, it's 1:57. I know a couple of our panelists have said they can stay on for the question, but if this goes over, completely understand, want everyone to know the time. So.
I'll jump in on this a little bit. One thing that I've noticed since I've left Smith is that Smith has become this like powerhouse generator of Fulbright recipients. And I feel like it has created, as much as that's amazing, I think it has created this incredible pressure to receive these like big name grants by the time you are 22 years old. You don't have to get a Fulbright by the time you're 22. Like you can get one at 35, 45, 55. There are so, and also there are other awards and grants, and also we don't always have to go for an award. So I just want to put that out there. By the time I received mine, I was kind of in the midpoint of my teaching journey, and then by the time I started my PhD, I was 42. And I thought I was going to start, I actually thought I was going to start at 22 just out of Smith. I mean, I used to send away for like the paper catalogs back in 1997 of, you know, the like, I used to send away for like the English department, English doctoral programs at Duke or wherever. I am so glad I didn't do a PhD straight out of Smith, because starting one at 42 in English education at TC means so much more to me, because I actually know why I'm there. I know why I'm there. I know that I want to work with teachers. I know that I want to work with the next generation of teachers. I don't think I would have known why I was at Duke University in the English department as a PhD student at 22. What, I was going to write more essays about literature? Like that has no meaning. And so I really think it's important to like pause and say, do I need this award, or do I need to live life a little bit and understand where it is, where I'm going, and what values. I think Allie, you mentioned this earlier, and I think Chelsea too, like what are it's not just like values in terms of achievement, it's here. It's like not living a life of fragmentation and saying, how can I live a life where I'm actually living up to the things I believe in? And I actually think you need to go through really hard shit to get to that, to get to those realizations.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I was talking to a student who was like, one of my students, she's a junior and she's deciding maybe she doesn't want to be a speech therapist. Maybe she wants to be a physician's assistant. And she's saying, but it's too late to change. She's a junior in college, and I think, but I think we can do this. We do this to ourselves. Like we can do it forever to ourselves. Oh, I'm too old, or it's too late for me. And I think, usually it's not. I don't know if Allie or Chelsea want to speak to this question.
I mean, I think at this point, I think it's just important to normalize like multiple career changes or directions over time, over the course of your life. I mean, I'm only speaking from the perspective of my generation, but I personally know that my generation is not like my parents' generation, where I think just to normalize that. And for me, it really helps having role models to look towards. So like I love learning stories about musicians who didn't get their start until later. I love that because it happens all the time. And I'm right with Ileana. I got a scholarship to pursue a PhD that the stipulation of it was I had to use it within 2 years of graduating Smith. And at that time I started working at Smith with Jess, but also thinking about the PhD and reading Chronicle of Higher Education and realizing what it actually meant to get a PhD. And I was like, I'm 22, I am not ready for this. And I'm so glad that I made that decision, because if I do go back to school at some point in my life, it will be from a place of like knowing why I'm actually there, and having intention behind it beyond just I love academia. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that question. And then we had a nice comment in the chat come in from Denise. Rather than rejection, we might consider these experiences course correction. Maintain your agency, your choices, and has been said, your values. Clarity is a gift.
Yeah. So I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank Ileana and Ali and Chelsea for taking the time to speak on this panel. It's just been amazing to be with you during this hour, and you're all just incredible. So I feel lucky. And Lindsay, I don't know, is there anything else we need to do to wrap up?
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended. We had over 100 people on today, and that's just such a wonderful, it's just so wonderful to be on a Zoom full of Smithies and listening to such an incredible topic. I think there were so many comments, and it really just hit home for folks. And so I want to thank the panelists for sharing so openly and really helping guide this conversation. And then also we have a survey that's going to go out following this webinar. So please share. We'd love to hear what you're interested in, any future topics you might want to hear from, and we'd love to hear from you and see you on a future webinar event. We have a cooking one at the end of this week. So thank you again. Thank you all for being here. And thank you especially to our panelists and for Jess for hosting and designing this conversation. It's been wonderful. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.